The sun was setting over the turquoise waters of the Bahamas, casting a golden glow over the luxurious resort. It was the perfect honeymoon destination, the kind of place couples dream about. Soft white sand, gentle waves, and a paradise meant for love and celebration. For newlyweds, this was supposed to be the start of forever. They had checked in just a few days earlier, a young couple filled with excitement. Witnesses later recalled how they seemed happy, laughing at dinner, holding hands as they walked along the beach. From the outside, they looked like any other newlyweds enjoying their first days as husband and wife. But behind closed doors, something else was unfolding. The hotel staff had noticed small signs. The wife, a beautiful young woman with a radiant smile, had appeared tense at times. A few guests whispered that they had seen her flinch when her husband spoke to her in a sharp tone. Others said she seemed quieter than expected, almost as if she were walking on eggshells. But no one imagined that just days later, this honeymoon would turn into a nightmare. It was late at night when the first signs of trouble emerged. Guests staying in the rooms nearby reported hearing muffled voices, a heated argument. At first, it seemed like a normal couple's quarrel. Maybe they were arguing over something trivial, like a dinner reservation or travel plans for the next day. But the voices grew louder, angrier. There was a sharp sound, like furniture being pushed or something breaking. Then, a sudden silence. A hotel security guard, making his rounds, heard something unsettling, a woman's muffled cries, followed by a loud thud. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what he had just heard. It wasn't uncommon for couples to argue, especially after drinking at the resort's bar. But something about this felt different. It felt wrong. He decided to report it. But before he could, another sound cut through the night, a scream. Guests in nearby rooms were now wide awake. Some rushed to their balconies, others picked up their phones to call the front desk. Within minutes, hotel security was at the door. They knocked. No answer. They knocked again, this time louder. A man's voice responded, his tone firm but slightly frantic. He claimed everything was fine. His wife was sleeping, and they didn't want to be disturbed. The guards exchanged glances. They could hear movement inside, the shuffling of feet. Something wasn't right. The decision was made to enter the room. What they found inside would haunt them forever. The room was in disarray, broken glass on the floor, a toppled-over chair, and, in the corner of the dimly lit space, the lifeless body of the young bride. Her once beautiful face was bruised and swollen, her body motionless. The husband stood nearby, his hands trembling, his breathing heavy. He muttered something about an accident, about how she had fallen. But the evidence in front of them told a different story. The police arrived quickly, sirens cutting through the stillness of the night. The husband was taken into custody, his protests growing weaker with each passing moment. As officers examined the scene, the horrifying truth became clear. This was no accident. This was a brutal act of violence. The news spread rapidly, first among the hotel staff, then the guests, and soon across the world. A couple who had vowed to love and cherish each other had instead ended their marriage in the most tragic way imaginable. The bride, a woman full of dreams and a future ahead of her, had become yet another victim of a story that plays out far too often behind closed doors. They met in the most ordinary way, the kind of love story that starts like any other. Friends introduced them, or maybe they crossed paths at work. He was charming, confident, the kind of man who knew how to make an impression. She was kind-hearted, full of life, the kind of woman people naturally gravitated toward. From the outside, they seemed like the perfect match, two people who had found something rare and beautiful. In the beginning, everything was perfect. He adored her, showered her with attention, sent her good morning texts every day, planned romantic dates, made her feel like the most special person in the world. Friends envied their love. Family members smiled, believing she had found someone who would cherish her forever. And she believed it too. The proposal was everything she had dreamed of. Grand yet intimate, a moment she would never forget. He got down on one knee, spoke of forever, of growing old together. She said yes, without hesitation. The wedding followed soon after, a beautiful ceremony filled with laughter and love. They exchanged vows, promised to stand by each other through everything, believing in the dream that marriage was supposed to be. But behind the smiles in the wedding photos, behind the perfect Instagram posts, were moments no one saw. Moments she never spoke about, perhaps because she didn't fully understand them herself. The first time his voice turned sharp over something small, the way he grabbed her arm just a little too tightly when they disagreed. It wasn't enough to make her worry. Not yet. He always apologized after, always had an explanation. He was just stressed. He just loved her so much. As the wedding day approached, little things started to feel different. He became more possessive, questioned where she was going, who she was talking to. At first, she saw it as love. Maybe he just cared too much. But deep down, something felt off. She pushed the thought aside. After all, no relationship was perfect, right? Then came the honeymoon, a dream destination, a trip they had planned for months. The Bahamas, paradise. The first day was perfect, long walks on the beach, candlelit dinners, laughter. But there were moments, small ones, barely noticeable. The way his mood shifted suddenly. The way he clenched his jaw if another man so much as looked at her. The way he held her hand just a little too tight, almost as if he was trying to control her. Then, the first real argument. No one knows what triggered it. Maybe something small, something insignificant. But it escalated quickly. His voice was louder than before, his words sharper. For the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. She tried to calm him down, to defuse the situation, but he wasn't listening. She had seen glimpses of this side of him before, but never like this. The next morning, he was back to being the man she fell in love with. He held her close, whispered apologies, said he didn't mean it. He blamed the stress, the travel, the excitement of the wedding. She wanted to believe him. She had just married him. Leaving wasn't an option, at least not yet. But things didn't get better. The mood swings became more unpredictable. One moment, he was loving and sweet. The next, something small would set him off. The way she laughed too long at a joke, the way she looked at her phone. He started accusing her of things that didn't make sense. The tension in their hotel room grew thick, the air heavy with unspoken words. By the third night, she was exhausted, mentally, emotionally. She just wanted to enjoy her honeymoon, to believe that things would get better once they got home. But deep inside, she knew. She knew something was wrong, that she was seeing a side of him she had ignored before. And now, she was trapped in paradise with him. The final argument began like the others. Sharp words, accusations. But this time, it was different. This time, he wasn't just angry. He was furious. The walls of the hotel room closed in. There was nowhere to run, no one to hear her. And then, everything went silent. It never starts with violence. It starts with love, with warmth, with promises. It starts with someone who seems perfect, someone who makes you feel special, like you're the only person in the world. They say all the right things, do all the right things. You feel safe. You feel wanted. You feel like you've found the kind of love people spend their lives searching for. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things begin to shift. At first, it's subtle. A comment here, a look there, a question that feels harmless, but lingers in the back of your mind. Why are you wearing that? Who are you talking to? Do you really need to go out tonight? It doesn't feel like control. At least, not yet. It feels like concern, like care. Then the apologies start. Not from you, but from them. Small explosions of anger, followed by desperate attempts to make it right. A raised voice. Then flowers the next day. A cruel insult. Then a tearful embrace. They didn't mean it. They were just tired. They were just stressed. And you believe them because you want to. Because the person standing in front of you, apologizing, isn't the monster you glimpsed the night before. They're the person you love. The person you promised yourself to. The cycle repeats itself, over and over again. It's a pattern, one that's been studied, documented, experienced by far too many. It starts with tension, a slow build-up of frustration. Small things begin to irritate them, how you speak, how you laugh, how you exist. The air becomes thick with unsaid words, the weight of their disappointment pressing down on you. You start to shrink, to make yourself smaller, to avoid setting them off. And then the explosion, the breaking point, a moment where all that bottled-up tension erupts into something dark, something violent. It could be words, sharp and cutting, designed to tear you down. It could be hands, gripping too tightly, leaving bruises where love was supposed to be. It could be worse. But then, just as suddenly as the storm arrives, it's gone. And in its place, the honeymoon phase begins. The apologies, the grand gestures, the desperate attempts to erase what just happened. They swear it will never happen again. They swear they love you. And for a while, it feels real. It feels safe again, until the cycle starts over. She might not have recognized it at first. Maybe she thought it was a one-time thing, a moment of weakness, a mistake. Maybe she believed the man she married was still there, buried beneath the flashes of anger. Maybe she thought love could fix it, that she could fix him. But the truth is, it was never going to stop. Not on its own. The night in that hotel room wasn't the first time he lost control. It was just the worst. It was the night the cycle reached its inevitable end, the night the pattern completed itself one final time. And when it was over, when the rage had passed and the silence had settled, there was nothing left to fix. The news spread quickly. It started with whispers in the hotel lobby, hushed voices between staff members who had seen the flashing police lights outside. Guests woke up to the sound of sirens, stepping out onto their balconies to witness the commotion below. Some had heard the screams the night before, the argument that had echoed through the hallways. Others had slept through all, only learning the horror the next morning. But by then, it was already too late. Her body was taken away in silence, a stark contrast to the violent end she had suffered. The once beautiful honeymoon suite, filled with laughter and promises just days before, was now a crime scene. Yellow tape sealed the doorway, and forensic teams moved in and out, collecting every trace of what had happened inside. The man who had vowed to protect her stood in handcuffs, his face blank, his eyes empty. The dream was over. Authorities worked quickly to piece together the final moments of her life. Witnesses came forward, hotel staff, guests, anyone who had seen or heard something in the days leading up to the tragedy. One woman remembered seeing them at dinner, the way he spoke to her in a low, firm voice while she stared down at her plate. A bartender recalled the way he grabbed her wrist when she tried to get up from the bar. A housekeeper mentioned the argument they had overheard the day before. The pieces of the puzzle were all there, scattered like breadcrumbs leading to an inevitable conclusion. The medical examiner's report confirmed what many already suspected. The injuries were not from a single fall. They were from repeated blunt force trauma, evidence of a struggle that lasted longer than anyone wanted to imagine. This was not an accident. This was a brutal, deliberate act of violence. Her family received the call no one should ever have to receive. The excitement they had felt just days earlier, celebrating her wedding, was replaced by unimaginable grief. They had sent her off on a honeymoon, expecting her to return with stories of adventure, with souvenirs and laughter. Instead, they were now preparing for a funeral. Her mother was the first to speak to the press. Through tears, she described her daughter as kind, loving, full of life. She had dreams, ambitions, plans for the future. She was supposed to have a lifetime ahead of her, but that future had been stolen in an instant. And for what? A moment of rage. A man who couldn't control himself. The world watched as the case unfolded. People wanted answers. How could this have happened? Why didn't anyone stop it? But for those who understood the cycle of abuse, the answer was all too familiar. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a pattern, a slow-burning fire that had finally consumed everything in its path. Statistics flooded the news. 1 in 3 women worldwide experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. Every day, an average of 3 women in the U.S. are killed by a current or former partner. These weren't just numbers. These were real lives, real people, just like her. The conversations began. People shared their own stories of controlling partners, of fear that started small but grew into something suffocating. Some spoke about the times they had ignored red flags, convinced themselves things would get better. Others admitted they had stayed in dangerous relationships far longer than they should have because they were scared, because they thought love could fix it, because they didn't know how to leave. Experts weighed in, explaining the psychology behind abuse, the power dynamics, the manipulation, the way abusers isolate their victims before the real violence even begins. It was never just about anger. It was about control, about dominance, about breaking someone down so completely that they no longer recognized themselves. In the days that followed, her name trended on social media. People demanded justice. They demanded change. Awareness campaigns sprang up, urging people to recognize the warning signs, to speak up before it was too late. Helpline numbers were shared. Organizations came forward offering resources, shelters, legal assistance. But for her, it was too late. The help she needed, the support that could have saved her, came too late. And that was the hardest truth of all. She had been loved, cherished, celebrated. And yet, in the end, she had died alone, trapped in a room with the one person who was supposed to protect her. Her case would go to trial. The evidence was undeniable, the witnesses clear in their testimonies. He would be convicted. He would spend years, maybe even the rest of his life, behind bars. But that didn't bring her back. That didn't undo what had happened. And so the world moved forward. The news cycle changed. Another tragedy took its place in the headlines. But for those who knew her, those who loved her, the pain didn't fade. It stayed, an ache that would never truly heal. A reminder of a love story that had turned into a nightmare. A life that had ended far too soon.